Question two in the name of Craig FOSS.
Mr. Speaker.
Craig FOSS.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and reads, is he aware of any reports of government spending commitments by the previous government which have no funding set aside to pay for them?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, there are quite a large number of such reports, and I'll just discuss a few. The previous government made multi-year commitments to a $1 billion home insulation program for which no funding was allocated, a range of commitments exceeding $1 billion of investment in the rail system for which no funding was allocated, and in addition they neglected to commit to a $1 billion over 3 years needed to maintain the viability of the ACC non-earners fund.
Mr. Speaker.
Craig FOSS.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister. Has the Minister seen any further reports of government spending commitments which have no funding set aside to pay for them?
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Bill English.
Yes, I have. There was no funding set aside for $300 million of economic transformation announced in the 2008 budget, and only a fraction of the extra $600 million trumpeted for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I might say, Mr. Speaker, in the light of these very large commitments, the previous government pretended that it was going to put together a budget on just $1.75 billion for new spending for this year, when its average new spending on the three previous years was almost twice that.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister accept Treasury advice that it is proper practice for future but as yet unfinalised cost estimates to be specified as either specific or contingent fiscal risks, or is he assuring the House that his 2009 budget will contain none of those?
Supplementary.
The Honourable Bill English.
The Treasury appears to have had a great deal of difficulty keeping up with the large number of unfunded promises made by the previous government, such as, for instance, the promise of the universal student allowance, which even the Labor Party worked out during the election campaign was a vote loser, not a vote winner.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
I see that you are already anticipating the nature of the point of order, that the response does not in any way address the question about the practice of unspecified fiscal risks.
The question indeed asked about the practice with respect to fiscal risks and the treatment in the budget. I would ask the Minister to respond more directly to that part of the question.
Which part of the question? Mr. Speaker, I actually didn't understand that question.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, that's a worry. Point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, willing to repeat the question or to provide a short tutorial in the nature of...
Order. Point. Member will resume his seat. Points of order do not have such comments attached to them at all. The honourable member should know that. I'll invite him to repeat his question so that all members can ascertain the question and have it answered properly. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
To the Minister, does he accept Treasury advice that it is proper practice for future but as yet unfinalised cost estimates to be specified as either specific or contingent fiscal risks, or is he assuring the House that his 2009 budget will contain none of these?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, the member might like to answer the question why the specific and highly contingent fiscal risk of the non-earners fund was left out of the pre-election update. Why did the government try to hide that billion-dollar risk?
Point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
As you are well aware and have already ruled, the question was very specific about the 2009 budget. The member quoted a historical example which does not counter the point that has been made, and I look forward to his addressing the question. Can we have another answer, Mr. Speaker?
The question being put to the Minister was pretty specific about the treatment of fiscal risks. The Minister responded with a response that asked why something was left out. I do ask the Minister to indicate how fiscal risks will be treated in the future, as the questioner has asked. It seems to be a reasonable question. In the public interest, the Minister does not have to answer, of course.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable
Mr Speaker, if the member wanted the answer to that question, he should have asked that question. I mean, you put it much more clearly than the member did, and I invite him to put a clear, straightforward question.
Speaking to the point of order, Mr.
Speaking to the point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, at your direction, I've repeated the question twice. You obviously found it clear. I'm happy to repeat it a third time if that would assist the Minister.
I invite the member to repeat the question, and I expect, though, if the question is as I heard it before, I expect that technical question to be answered. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Does the Minister accept Treasury advice that it is proper practice for future but as yet unfinalised cost estimates to be specified as specific or contingent fiscal risks, or is he assuring the House that the 2009 budget will contain none of those?
The Honourable Bill English.
Yes.
Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister.
Point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe. Order. Order.
Mr. Speaker,
order. A member is seeking to raise a point of order and he will be heard in silence.
Mr. Speaker, given that you have 3 times directed the member to answer the question, particularly with reference to the forward-looking aspects of Budget 2009, can the Minister confirm that his answer yes was in relation to Budget 2009?
Order. The Minister does not need to enlarge on his question. On his answer, he chose to answer one part of the member's supplementary question, I presume with respect to Treasury advice, and that is all understanding orders the Minister is required to do. If the member adds more than one part to a supplementary question, he can't expect them all to be answered. Point of order, the Honourable
Just seek a little clarification from you. In the event that the 2009 budget, for the first time since the Public Finance Act came into force, doesn't contain any specific fiscal risks, I take it the Minister will not be exposed to a breach of privilege charge.
Order. The member
will resume his seat.
The member will resume his seat. He well knows that that is not a point of order. Craig Foss.
Supplementary to the Minister, Mr Speaker.
Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, what was the operating allowance for the 2009 budget as set out by the previous government?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, it seems from estimates from the commitments made by the previous government that they made an allowance of $1.75 billion but appeared to make commitments of more than $3 billion.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Supplementary question to the Minister. Did his answer to my friend David Cunliffe's last supplementary apply to the first or the second leg of that supplementary?
Order. The Minister did not hear that question. I invite the Honourable Trevor Mallard to repeat it and ask members of the House please to keep the noise down so ministers can hear questions. The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Speaker, can I ask the Minister whether his reply to David Cunliffe's last question applied to the first or the second part of that question?
The Honourable Bill English.
The first.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Speaker, has the Minister seen reports that the government's so-called $9 billion economic stimulus package is in fact not new stimulus at all, and that it is rather spending and tax cut decisions made very largely by the previous government and before the latest data on the gravity of the international recession became available?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, yes, I have seen those reports and I think most of them originated from me.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Will there be unspecified or contingent fiscal risks outlined in the 2009 budget?
The Honourable Bill English.
Yes, it's a requirement of the Public Finance Act.
We come now to